All good? Excellent. Okay, hi everybody. My name's Tom Waud. I'm Chief Technical Architect at Westbrook, which is a platinum partner in the UK. And I'm going to talk today a little bit about getting started with Wave. So in the last few months, I've had the opportunity to actually get a bit hands-on with it. And through those experiences, I just want to kind of share that with you today. So what am I going to talk about? So really kind of high-level topics, but a lot to cover in 20 minutes. So I'm going to talk about applications, data sets, how we get our data into Wave using data integration, lenses, essentially your reports, and then dashboards. So starting from the top, what is an application in Wave? And an application is a collection of Wave resources, typically organized with the target audience in mind. So you'd be thinking about sales or service or marketing. You're kind of free to kind of put those together however you choose, but it is that kind of logical grouping, probably familiar with the same kind of concepts within Salesforce itself. So what is it made up of? Well, typically you have a data flow associated with each application. It'll contain multiple data sets and potentially recipes, which is a new feature which I'll mention a bit later. It could have multiple lenses, and the same goes for dashboards as well. So moving on to the first of those, what is a data set? So a data set is a collection of related data that is stored in a denormalized form. So you're probably familiar with the kind of the top here. This is what Salesforce would typically look like. You've got an account and a contacts record. They're very kind of distinct. And the reason we do that is we try not to replicate data within our systems. If you were to imagine having a contact record where you had each account, its name, its industry, and then suddenly you want to update its name, you've got to update an awful lot of records, potentially. So there's a good reason why we kind of keep those separate normally. But when we come to something like Wave and I guess reporting in general, we tend to try and combine all of our objects or tables together to build reports off of them more easily. So what you see below would be what you typically see within a data set, which was combining account and contact data together. So here we can see, for instance, on each row, account name and account industry. So when building our data sets, we have to have in mind what we're going to be doing with our report. What is it trying to illustrate to our users? And starting from there, we need to work out which objects we want within that. So what options do we have for creating data sets within Wave? I'm going to tackle two of these in a fair bit of detail, and probably skim through the other three. The two I'm going to really focus on are Dataflow JSON, and JSON standing for JavaScript Object Notation. We'll see a bit more of that in a bit. The Dataset Builder, which is a bit more of a kind of declarative approach or config-based approach to building a data set. And then we've got a few others. So there's a Wave connector for Excel, so you can upload your data sets or create a data set from Excel, manual upload, and the external data API. So tackling the first of those, the Dataflow JSON. So what is it? What are the advantages, disadvantages of this approach? So it allows you to combine data from both Salesforce and external systems. You can apply filters. You can add sort of calculated fields. But unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, it depends which angle you're coming at it from. But a disadvantage certainly is that because it's written in JSON syntax, not everyone is going to be able to get to grips with it as quickly as if it was a sort of point-and-click based approach. So there is a bit of a learning curve associated with it. I think anyone from a programmatic background will take to it very easily. I think if you've not seen JSON before, maybe if you're an admin, you know that initial curve is going to just be that little bit steeper, at least to start with. And then finally, the last one, so not capable of performing complex joins. So to kind of describe this properly, in my previous example, I had like the account and contact records. Now, it's very important you choose which object or table you want to be the focus for your report. If I was to start, for instance, let's say with the account object and then join in the contact data, what Wave will do is it'll arbitrarily just pick the first contact record and merge it into the account. So let's say we start with 3 accounts. I might still have 10 contacts, but what I'll end up with in my data set is 3 records to represent those accounts. That might not be what I want. I might actually want to report my contact data. So having my contact object as the root where I start from means I then end up with those 10 records, and I just add in the accounts onto it. So it's important to kind of think about that when you're building your data set. So where do we get to this in Wave? So once you're within the Wave Analytics application, you can go up to the handy little tool icon in the top right, and from that drop down, you can select Data Manager. You then want to be selecting the data flow view, sort of in the center of the screen there. And from there, you can see the data flows that you've got. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, you've typically got one associated with each of your applications. So for instance, you can see there's a sales, a service, and then kind of this default one that I've been playing around with. I can then get to the JSON file for that data flow by using the drop-down menu on the right. So I can download, I can then make my modifications and re-upload it. And once I'm kind of happy with it, I'm probably going to start it or schedule it so that it runs on a sort of repeat basis. So taking a little bit of a closer look at what one of these files looks like. So very basic example here is extracting accounts, extracting contacts, combining them together, and then registering that as a data set so that I can build reports off the back of it. So we go into the first step here, and what we're doing here, extract account, there's each step within this file has an action associated with it. And this SFDC digest that you're seeing is essentially saying, I want to go get data from Salesforce. Take some parameters, and crucially what you're seeing here is both the object that I want to extract from and the fields that I'm interested in pulling into my data set. So you don't have to bring everything, bring what you need. Same story more for contacts, obviously a different object though in this sense, and different fields. So now we get on to the interesting bit. So how do we kind of combine that together? And here you'll note that the action is augment, and this is essentially telling the data flow that we want to join two objects together. We select what we want to be our left object, and going back to what I said a moment ago, this is the one that you want to be the most granular. So if at the end of the day I want 10 records because I'm working with my contact is going to be my left object here. So left, extract contact, right, extract account. So those are the two objects I'm interested in. I then have to basically specify the key. So that's the way I'm going to join these two together. So account ID on contact is going to join with the ID of an account record. I then tell Wave which of the fields I'm interested in combining from my right-hand object. So again, I don't have to take all of them, but in this case I am, ID and name. And then I also have to tell it what the relationship is. So when the data set is created, the names that my fields get, the root object, in this case contact, you would just see things like ID, name, account ID, so on. But the joined objects, in this case accounts, will be prefixed by that relationship name. So when I've built my data set, we'll see things like account.id and account.name. So it just allows me to differentiate particularly fields with the same name across objects. And then the final step, which is to register that data set. So I basically have to say which step within the data flow I'm going to be sourcing the data from. So in this case, it's important that I say it's the transform augment step, because that's where I combine them together. And I have to give it obviously a name or an alias. So in this case, I'm calling my dataset account_contacts. And this is what we'd end up with. So if you were to envisage this is our data set, we've got ID and name, essentially from our contact object. And then we've got account.id and account.name from the account object. And you can see how the relationship kind of prefix is applied to the field name. So that's a kind of slightly more codey type approach to building out these data sets. What's the alternative? Well, the alternative is to use the Dataset Builder. So advantages, it's graphical, it's easy to use, it automatically generates the steps into your JSON file. Disadvantage, well, you can only use Salesforce as a data source. You can't use your external files or data sources for this. You can't apply any filters, you can't calculate any fields, and steps are appended to the data flow may be inefficient. So what I mean by this is if, let's say I want to create 3 or 4 different data sets, and each of those is joining in information from the account object, when I look at my data flow, what I'll see is extracting the account maybe 4 times. So it's not bad per se, it's just potentially inefficient because it's going to Salesforce, doing that thing 4 times when it could have just done it once and reused it. So it's kind of a trade-off to worry about. The good thing, though, is that you can modify the data flow afterwards, so you can kind of take out those inefficiencies, but kind of get an accelerator by using this. So how do we go about using this? So we choose to create a new data set, we give it a name, we associate it with an application, and we choose the Salesforce option, which then basically takes us into our Dataset Builder canvas. And what you're seeing here essentially is search criteria for searching for a Salesforce object that we want as our root object for building out our data set. So I've done a search on contacts. Search results are below. I click on the contact record. And then that drops it into my canvas as the root object. So you can see that denoted that kind of root comment underneath it. And what pops up then, if I click on the little symbol in the right-hand corner there, which would ordinarily be a plus when this sort of pop-up's not visible, will display me my fields and relationships on that object. So from there, I can basically search for my fields, tick the ones that I want to include in my data set. And then once I'm happy with my fields, I can click on the Relationships tab and essentially do the same sort of thing there. And I select which relationships I want to join in by clicking on the appropriate button. And what you'll see then in that top right there is it's now sort of indicated a link between that contact and account objects. And I can essentially then repeat the same process. So I can then drill in onto my account, add the fields, add more further relationships if I want to, and gradually build out my data set. So I think you'll agree, probably much easier than writing a JSON file. So to give you an example, though, of the sort of thing it will produce in the data flow, if we take a look at that now, whereas we did have some nice clean kind of step names before, they're kind of given names like 101, 102, 103. And what I'd encourage you to do is start with the Dataset Builder, but then consider downloading that JSON file and then cleaning it up a little bit. And the reason I say that is, as a bit of a lesson learned, you'll be thankful you did it once your data flow grows to an incredible number of steps, because when you're dealing with things like 101, 102, it doesn't really mean a lot. So I'd say kind of keep on top of it. And all you're really doing is changing the names. The rest of it you can kind of leave as is. Now, that last bullet, the inability to filter, create derived fields, and join external data sources, this can be overcome in the new spring release. So Salesforce have released what are called recipes. And essentially what these are almost like post steps that are performed after your data flow is run. So imagine your data sets have been brought in. You could only bring in your Salesforce data sets, but now I want to say, let's join it with some external data. I can use that recipe and say, well, take this data set that was created by the data flow, take this external data source, put it together, maybe do some filtering, some calculated fields, and then end up with something which is a bit more like what we would have got if we'd done it all in Dataflow, but with the JSON editor. So it's good. It's basically a declarative approach, much easier to use. The only thing you kind of have to bear in mind is that running a data recipe does count towards your daily limit of how many data flows, or in this case, recipes can be run. So you've got to balance those nicely. Alternate options, so manual upload of CSV files. So you could directly just take a spreadsheet, upload it essentially into Salesforce. Kind of best practice, I think, around this would generally be that you'd want to use this for static reference data, something that doesn't change very often. Otherwise, some poor person is going to have to load this thing in every hour, every day, whatever you decide that cycle is, and it's not going to be a lot of fun for them. You also really want to do it with data that doesn't require too much by way of transformation. If you're going to have to do a lot of work on the file before it's in a fit state to put into Wave, then again, think about the person who's going to have to repeat that lots and lots. So it's not really ideal for that scenario. external data API. So particularly where you're sourcing your data from other systems, this is something you really want to consider. It's certainly a more technical approach. There are various middleware providers who can help facilitate this, but essentially think about using it when your external data undergoes frequent change and where it requires transformation, because it essentially is going to automate those steps for you. Okay, on to our next subject, so Lens. So it lets you explore your data graphically and is the basis for building any dashboard. So essentially it's kind of like your Salesforce reports, and they come in various flavors. So you've got your bar, donut, timeline, tables, etc. They're all powered by SQL under the hood. So SQL is the query language that Waud uses to create these reports. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of depth on this. To be honest, you can do most of the work you need to in Waud without ever really getting into the detail on this. But it just kind of be aware it exists and that it's a bit more of an advanced topic that you can research in the future. So when you're looking at a lens, you're essentially pulling in a data set, and your data set is comprised of fields, and these kind of fall into two categories. You've got what are called measures, which are your quantitative data. So these are things like revenue or numeric kind of data. And typically, when you're building reports, you're going to be wanting to aggregate this data. So you want to perform a function on it like a sum or a count or an average. The other types of fields, you've got dimensions. So these are more, well, these are qualitative. Get this right, qualitative. So things like region, product, they're kind of like text fields essentially, or categories of some sort. So they're what you want to group by. So given this example here, for instance, this is pulling in data from an opportunity product data set. Product family on the left, and quantity, that's our measure, is what we're essentially grouping by and what we're aggregating to build this report. So last piece, so dashboards. So dashboards are a collection of widgets that work together to tell a story from multiple angles. So again, going back to your applications, you'll be looking at sales or service. So perhaps you want a sales dashboard, or I want to examine, for instance, in this instance, my opportunities, and I want to see where they are at various stages. I want to see what products or product by family I'm selling, and I want a kind of view of average and total opportunity size out there, and I want to apply various filters to it. So top left, we've got my filters. Top right, I kind of got my very high-level summaries of what I'm doing with my opportunities. And then below, I've got my charts, so opportunity stage and opportunity products. And then finally, you'll notice this little widget up here, which is a toggle that will allow me to reorientate the opportunity product chart so that it either shows it by product family or by product name. So how does this all work together? So once I create a new dashboard using the dashboard designer, I essentially see a canvas a little bit like this, and you can see that I already dropped several components on, but I've got this kind of empty space here in the bottom left. So let's kind of walk through the process of dropping a widget on. So I've got my widgets on the left-hand side, and I've got various types, so things like charts, lists, combos, those sorts of things, text boxes and the like. So I just drag those on. In this case, I'm going to drag a chart, and when I drag my chart on, it's going to ask me what data set do I want to base it on. And it's important to know that not every widget on here has to be based on the same data set. In this case, I'm going to look for opportunities. It then takes me into the lens kind of designer, and I then basically build whatever chart it is that I want to display on my dashboard. In this case, I want to have my opportunity stages, and I want a count of each of the opportunities I have in each of those. When I'm done with that, it essentially drops it in, and then you can see you kind of completed out your dashboard. So one of the last concepts I just want to talk about is the concept of faceting. So faceting allows the selection made in one widget to automatically update another. And what you'll observe in Waud is that when several widgets are bound to the same data set, when you change any one of those, it will automatically update the others for you without you having to do anything. So if I applied a filter, let's say, on account or industry, the opportunity stage chart would automatically update. The problem I get into, though, is that when I've used multiple data sets, you have to explain to Wave the connection between the two. So the way I do that, the newest way, the way that's available in Spring 17, is to use this function called connect data sources. So in your dashboard designer, use a little 3-dot kind of icon, and you choose the connect data sources option. This will then show you a pop-up, and essentially what you're doing here is you're basically explaining how to connect each of your widgets together. So for instance, my account name filter, I'm basically saying the account name from opportunity is joined to the equivalent field on opportunity product. And by doing this, when I change any one of them, they'll automatically update each of those charts. Finally, bindings at a kind of lower level. So if I really want to get into the insides of the dashboard, I can press Control-E and see the JSON representation of my dashboard. And within there, I can sort of call functions. So if you recall, on the opportunity product charts, I had the option to toggle between product name and product family, and that would change the grouping of that chart. The way I'm achieving that is, rather than explicitly declaring the name of the field I want to group by, I use this function. And this basically refers to another widget that says, I want to use the selection from that widget, in this case its value, to pop in dynamically into this groups section. So as I toggle each button, it's essentially dropping in either product.family or product.name into the JSON file, and that automatically updates the chart. So that's an example of where you might need to get a bit more codey with Wave. So I guess in summary, that kind of is a bit of a whistle-stop tour, I guess, through Wave. It's very high level. I encourage you to look a little bit more. We've covered applications, we've covered data flows, how you get your data into the system, how you use that to build data sets, lenses, and dashboards. Where do I go to know more? So there's various useful developer guides, listed 4 of those there. I encourage you to do Trailhead. That's how I got started with it. And you can get your own Wave developer org. So this is something I didn't realize for a long time until I did these Trailheads. So you can, if you go to Trailhead, you'll also find the link there. But that will provision you with a Wave org. You can give you a set of data, and there's a good set of steps in Trailhead to take you through a lot of this. So hopefully I've shown that it's maybe not as complicated, or it's very easy to kind of get into and start playing with. There are more complex functions to it, but you can do an awful lot just with point and click. And with that, any questions? Question over there, just wait for the mic.
Hello. As you said, it still works only within the Salesforce, right? Within the data of Salesforce, what provides. It doesn't work like Tableau or any other BA tool?
So is your question, can it bring in data from other systems?
Yeah, yeah.
And the answer to that is yes. Like the declarative functions, the kind of point and click capabilities I've shown you is primarily aimed at Salesforce. But if you do need to get external data, you can either import it using CSV files, or is that API available that if you're prepared to either code for that API or use a bit of middleware, you can pull data from any system and get it in there.
Okay, thank you.
Another question at the back there.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, for the introduction to Wave. I'm not very familiar with it, but in your example for the JSON file that you created, used a very simple example, accounts and contacts, to denormalize that data. And you had parameters like left and right, right?
Okay.
Can you do more than just 2? Like say you're using the opportunity and you want to get accounts and contacts from the opportunity.
Right. So the question was essentially within your data flow, how do you combine more than 2 data sources together? And the answer to that is you basically feed in as the left the step name that combined the first 2. So in that case, it was like augment account with contact. That becomes your left object almost so in the next transformation. So you just chain them together until you've got everything you need.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Is there a question at the front here?
I didn't understood it. Like this data sets that you define, they are refreshed on demand, or the data is available real time from Salesforce?
So the question was, is the data available real time from Salesforce, or do you need to schedule a refresh or manually refresh it? So it's not real time. So you do have to schedule it or run it as a one-off. You can run, I think it's 24 data flows per day. So at most you could have it every hour, but less than that if you want. You can manually kick it off at any point though as well.
Okay, and another question, can you do like simple tabular reportings from the data that is in your data? Okay.
So as one of the chart types is a tabular report. Yeah. Any more questions? Great, I think we're done. Thank you.